welcome to your week 4 True Transformation Health Workshop. First of all, congratulations on all of the hard work that you've done to date, and we hope that you look forward to the next 2 weeks with us. So today the workshop is going to focus predominantly on those physical measurements that we asked you to take in week 1. So the BMI, the waist circumference, the abdominal circumference, the waist to hip ratio, and those types of measurements. So I want to talk to you a bit about the importance of them in terms of your metabolic health, and I'll finish the session on a discussion of the metabolic variables that would be measured in a blood sample should you decide to have one taken, which I would strongly recommend you do. And hopefully by the time of the end of this workshop you'll have a better understanding as to why. So hope you enjoy. Thanks, talk to you next week. Okay, so let's get started. So physical measurements refer to the body mass index or BMI, your waist circumference, abdominal circumference, waist to hip ratio, body composition and fitness level. So they're all regarded as physical measurements. Your metabolic measurements then that also obviously relate to your metabolic health include fasting blood glucose, fasting total cholesterol, fasting HDL or good cholesterol, fasting LDL or bad cholesterol, fasting triglycerides, and C-reactive protein. So we will come on to discuss all of these in more detail in the coming slides and how they relate to your health. BMI is the most widely accepted standard to estimate overweight and obese. And it's recommended by the National Institutes for Health. It's calculated by getting the person's body weight in kilos and dividing it by their height in meters squared. So you must have the body weight in kilos and you must have the height in meters squared. The BMI criteria are based on threshold values associated with increased risk of morbidity and mortality. So what that means is the BMI criteria that are set, they're set because once you go over a certain BMI, you are at increased risk of morbidity, so conditions like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and that in turn increases your risk of mortality, so death from those conditions. Now each ethnic group has slightly different BMI criteria, so the BMI criteria that I refer to will be applicable for Europeans and Americans. But we must be careful with our interpretation of BMI. So BMI takes into account your total body weight and your height. But it may not be appropriate for the trained population because when you consider a person's total body weight, it does not distinguish between the amount of fat mass they have and the amount of muscle mass they have. So for trained individuals who are very well trained but have a high muscle mass, so for example rugby players and some football players, because they have a lot of muscle, they're quite heavy, and then if you use the BMI calculations, they often end up in the obese category. And in fact, John, when we work out his BMI measurements, he ends up in the clinically obese category when clearly he isn't. So BMI is really appropriate for untrained people in the general population. So for example, if you look here, you have two people depicted. They both have the same BMI of 33.9, and if you look at them though, they have very different body composition. They weigh the same, but you have one individual with high muscle mass and low fat mass, and you have one individual with high fat mass and low muscle mass. So although they weigh the same and their BMI is the same, you can't use the BMI criteria as a measure for health because they're in two completely different health situations. So for that reason, the BMI is really only an important gauge of health in untrained sedentary individuals. So we have a look here at the relationship between BMI and mortality, so death from any disease. You can see as the BMI increases, so if you look at the bottom of the graph, as the BMI increases from 20 to 25 to 30 to 35 to 40, the risk of mortality also increases. And this is true for sedentary general population. Okay, so the criteria here. So you have the underweight, the normal weight and the overweight criteria, and then obese is divided into class 1, 2 and 3. So generally you want your BMI to be in the normal range, which is roughly a BMI of 20 to 25. And if you happen to be in the obese range, every unit that you bring your measurement down, so we'll say from 35 to 34 to 33 and so on, has a significant impact on your health. So it takes time to get the BMI to change, but every small change makes a massive difference to your health. Okay, so BMI really takes into account your total body weight, and it is an important measure of health in the untrained population. Now, another important measure of health is the waist circumference. And the waist circumference and the waist to hip ratio basically talk about the pattern of body fat distribution. So is it in the abdominal area or is it in the hip area? And we know that BMI is important, but we also know in terms of risk of disease that body fat distribution might be even more important. So body fat stored in the upper abdominal area carries the greatest risk for type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure and stroke. So if you happen to carry your body fat in the lower gluteal or hip region, you are more protected against these conditions than somebody who carries it in the upper abdominal area. Okay, so what should it be? The waist circumference should be less than 88 centimeters for women and less than 102 centimeters for men. And if you remember back to the first workshop, the waist circumference should be taken at the smallest point between the ribs and the top of your hip bone. Now, the waist to hip ratios should be less than 1 for men and less than 0.8 for women. So if your measurements are in those ranges, it just means that you have a very low risk of developing those chronic conditions. Okay, so body composition. So your body composition is very important for your health, and this refers to the amount of muscle and fat that you have. So the individuals presented in the schematic below have the very same weight, but they have very, very different body composition. And because of the difference in their body composition, they have very, very different health profiles and risk profiles for disease. So it is important that you know what your body composition is. And in terms of, well, what should it be, the recommendations can be very specific. So we have recommendations for 20 to 30-year-olds, 30 to 40-year-olds, and so on. But to keep it simple, in general, we should be somewhere between 20 and 30% body fat. Now, how would you assess that? So you have a few options. You have skin fold measurements, you have what we call bioelectrical impedance, and DEXA would be the gold standard. So the skin fold measurements would be done with the skin fold calipers, and generally you need a trained individual to do these. So that would be someone like a sports scientist, and so they do require technical expertise, and also they need expertise with regard to completing the equations to work out the body fats. So that may not be an option to you at home. The BIA scales, they're bioelectrical impedance scales. They would be probably widely available in most pharmacies, and basically you stand on them, you should stand on them in your bare feet, and electrical impulses are conducted up through the body, and they meet different resistance in fat and different resistance in muscle, and the equations are used then to calculate, well, how much fat is there and how much muscle is there. So they're quick, they're inexpensive, they're not invasive, but it is important to know that there are some disadvantages in that they would be very much affected by your hydration status. So you would need to make sure that your hydration routine would be the same prior to each measurement. Now, the DEXA is the gold standard. Now, the DEXA, you might know, is traditionally used to measure bone density, but in research we also use it to measure body composition. So looking at these, you may not have access to any of these, so really your option is to go back to the simple tape measure. And how will you know if you're losing body fat? Well, if you take your measure of your waist or your abdominal area or your hip area and it decreases because if you compare 1 pound of fat to 1 pound of muscle, they both weigh the same, they both weigh a pound, but the muscle is much more compact and has much more structure to it than fat. So if the circumferences are decreasing, it's a good indication that you're losing fat mass. So you can easily follow the guidelines that we gave you in week 1 to take those measurements, and it will give you a much better picture of what's going on. And speaking of fat mass, I just want to talk to you about some different types that we have. So what you're looking at here is the cross-sectional area of a person's abdomen. So they went to the hospital. These are some of our research subjects. They went to the hospital and they had an abdominal scan, and basically then what you're looking at is it's like a slice across the midsection, and it's just flipped up so that we can see it. And in red you can see the subcutaneous fat. Now that's fat that we all have stored in our body, and if you anywhere you can pinch and pull away from muscle, anywhere at all, so behind the arms, the abdominal area, that's subcutaneous fat. In green you have total fat, and in blue you have something called visceral fat that I want to bring your attention to, okay? Because this visceral fat is what's causing us a host of problems in terms of metabolic disease. We look at a better scan here. So you can see that both individuals have a good amount of subcutaneous fat, but there is a difference between the visceral fat surrounding the organs in the picture above and the visceral fat surrounding the organs in the picture below. So below, they're pretty much covered. And the problem with this visceral fat is it secretes a lot of hormones. It's like an endocrine organ by itself. And all of those hormones raise your blood pressure, they raise your sugar levels, they raise your cholesterol, and they send you down a fast track towards the development of diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So visceral fat lies deep within the body cavities and is associated with a greater risk of insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and a range of cardiovascular diseases. And often people would say to me, oh, I know such and such a person who eats nothing but rubbish, doesn't exercise, they're quite lean, and you know, what's the story with that? Well, often what can happen is they may look lean on the outside, but if you have a sedentary lifestyle and consume that type of a diet, that will impact your visceral fat stores, which you can't see from the outside, but it's not good for your health. They'll still produce the same hormones and still cause the same trouble. So this is something that we really need to consider. Now, just while we're on the subject of body fat and so on, I just want to spend the next few slides talking about obesity, right? And basically, the proven conditions that are associated with obesity would be hypertension, which is a fancy name for high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, a lot of different types of cancer, including breast cancer and colon cancer, sleep apnea, which is a condition whereby you don't sleep very well, you basically stop breathing for extended periods of time in your sleep, and it can be potentially very, very dangerous and fatal. Absolutely depression, joint problems, so hip issues, knee issues and so on, and skin disorders. Now they're just some of the issues that you can get, and I suppose the good thing to say would be a lot of those can be reversed if you get the body measurements down into the correct ranges. So in terms of what's been going on over the last 20 years in America, and we are seeing the same trend in Ireland. So if you look, this is a picture of all of the states in the US, okay, and the light blue indicates that less than 10% of the population are obese, which is a BMI greater than 30, okay. The darker blue indicates that 10 to 14% of the state is obese. And if we follow it over a number of years, the prevalence of obesity is rising to 15 to 90% in the darkest blue, greater than 20% in the yellow, greater than 25% in the red, greater than 30% in the deep red, and so on. So there's been major changes in the prevalence of obesity over the last 20 years in the US, and we're not too far behind in Ireland. And this has seen a similar rise in the prevalence of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and so on. So we know from research that obesity causes all of these conditions, but we also know that lifestyle change can reverse these conditions and also prevent them. So if we look at the Irish context, right, so in 1990, 11% of us were obese. In 2000, that changed dramatically, so only 42% of us had a normal BMI. In 2010, 36% of us had a normal BMI, and the rest of us were overweight or obese. But shockingly, if we keep going the way we are, in 2030, almost 90% of males and females in Ireland will either be overweight or obese. And that is going to cripple us with a plague of diabetes and everything else that comes with it. So this is a serious issue, and this is why I'm trying to bring your attention to the physical measurements so that you can self-monitor, and it might be useful for family members and friends. So when you go outside of those recommended ranges, your risk of disease increases, and it's something that can't be ignored because there's no exception to it. But on the positive note, of course, lifestyle can prevent all of that. Now, unfortunately, the picture is similar with our children. So in the Growing Up in Ireland survey in 2011, 30% of girls are either overweight or obese, and 22% of boys are either overweight or obese. Now, this data is predicted from a 2005 study where at the time 300,000 children were obese, and it's expected to rise by 10,000 per year, which is quite shocking. So in terms of the measurements, it's important to keep your BMI between 20 and 25 and your waist circumference less than 88 centimetres for women and less than 102 centimetres for men. Your waist-hip ratio should be less than 0.8 for women and less than 1 for men. And your body fat should be 20 to 30%. So please do, if you haven't done it already, please do have a look at your own measurements, because these 4 simple measurements give you a major understanding of the current status of your metabolic health. And I don't want you to focus solely on weight, I want you to take those measurements as well. And you need to remember, all small changes make a massive difference to your health. So if your values are outside of those ranges, it is going to take some time to get them back into the normal range. It will happen, but every small change and literally every step you take makes a massive difference. Okay, so anyone who works in my field knows that exercise is medicine. And I've explained in previous workshops about the relationship between fitness and metabolic health, even regardless of the fact of any changes in body weight. So some other benefits that might be appropriate for people who are trying to lose weight, just to be aware of. So exercise training, you definitely alter your body composition. Your weight will drop, your fat mass will drop, and you'll maintain or increase your lean tissue. That has a host of benefits for you in terms of cardiovascular health and metabolic health. Okay. Exercise increases your metabolism after the training session. So for the 12 to 24 hours after the training session, your body continues to burn calories to basically recover from the session. So it all helps to add up to a big energy deficit and thus weight loss. You will decrease your visceral fat stores with exercise, even if the weight doesn't change that much. And you now know that your visceral fat stores are very much related to metabolic disease because they produce a host of hormones that set off the chain of reactions that cause those problems. So taking your waist circumference will let you know what your current situation is, and exercise training will definitely decrease your waist circumference and decrease your waist to hip ratio. There will be significant improvements in your metabolic and cardiovascular health, and you will see that if you take a blood sample, okay, if you have it analysed in your local GPs. Blood pressure decreases, insulin sensitivity increases, which removes you from risk of diabetes. Your glucose tolerance increases, which also helps to prevent diabetes. Your lipid profiles will improve, which means that the bad cholesterols will decrease, the good cholesterols will increase, and that will improve your metabolic health. Vascular function increases, so the health of your blood vessels and your heart health and everything else increases. You decrease those inflammatory biomarkers that I was talking about that are produced from visceral fat, which is really, really important. And all of these can happen with and or without weight loss. So just to show you one particular study, this is a diabetes prevention project. It was a lifestyle intervention including weight loss and exercise, and the study basically found that lifestyle intervention was superior to medical therapy, so i.e. drugs, for preventing or delaying the development of diabetes in people who were pre-diabetic. Okay, so we know how powerful lifestyle is. We on numerous occasions have found people to be in the phase of pre-diabetes and have brought them back into normal glucose tolerance. It's so powerful. So is it important to have a fasting blood sample analysed for yourself? And the answer is yes. It's the best way to keep on top of your health. It only takes a few seconds and it literally might add years onto your life. You can't feel if your blood sugar is high or if your lipid levels aren't in the values that they should be. You get no symptoms. The first time you get a symptom is generally when you already have some type of a condition like type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease. Okay, so you can have irregularities in your blood variables for up to 5 years before you get any symptom of a condition. But if you had known in the years previous, you would have saved a huge amount of internal damage that happened in your body. So for the sake of the 10 seconds it takes to have the blood sample taken, if you don't do it and if you end up unfortunately with one of these conditions, you now have to make time for a lifetime of doctor visits, hospital visits, medications, and it does impact your quality of life. So it is worth having it done. And just to kind of show you, apart from all of the research that I do, in our True Transformation programs in studio, I insist that everybody gets their bloods done because then I know what I'm working with. And what we find is we take about 15 people in a group, and 50% of all of these people are diagnosed with a condition that they did not know they had. And these include high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, high cholesterol, the metabolic syndrome. So 50% of any random sample of the locality have these conditions that they didn't know about. Now the good thing about it is obviously they were there to do the lifestyle intervention, and in all cases all of these variables improve. But also if we find something severe like the presence of diabetes and you didn't know you had diabetes, we can adjust, we'll say, the exercise recommendations accordingly. So you need to know what you're dealing with to make sure what you're doing is safe as well, and that you're getting the most benefit from what you're doing. So all of these can be managed with lifestyle change, and all of them can be prevented with a healthy lifestyle. A simple blood test will tell you what your health is currently like, and for that reason I could not recommend enough that you would go and just have a blood sample taken. So what is measured, or what would you like to see measured? They measure a complete blood count. So that shows you your red blood cells, your white blood cells, your platelets, and so on. Okay? They measure different variables that show liver and kidney function. But I suppose from a metabolic point of view, you'd need to see your total cholesterol, your LDL cholesterol, your HDL cholesterol, your triglycerides, and your blood glucose. And the other one that's really important is something called C-reactive protein, and it's often just written as CRP. And that shows how much inflammation is in the body. And if it's high, that means that all of your organs and tissues are producing all of these inflammatory hormones that could have detrimental effects to your health. So the rest of the variables might be normal, but if your C-reactive protein is high, you need to engage in lifestyle change. Now the feedback you get are, on the left hand side of the page you will get your result, and on the right hand side of the page you will get the normal ranges. So you can clearly see if your value is within the normal range. And there will also be an asterisk beside any of the variables that are not in the normal range to make it very easy for you to see that. Okay? So, if your results are in the normal range, first of all, congratulations, that is a great result. And I would have them repeated every year. If any of the results are not in the normal range, absolutely consult your GP. So I would recommend that you always do that so that they can go through everything with you in detail. You should have them retested after the True Transformation program to see how much they change because of lifestyle intervention, and they will change because they always do. Continue with your lifestyle change and have them assessed every 3 months until they come back down into the normal range. And also I would say, just if you have the results and you want to even run them by me or make sure that you're doing the right thing for those results, then by all means do that. But absolutely, please do have this done. So in summary, okay, we all need to actively look after our health. Do not take it for granted, because if you come against a problem, and I have worked with people in the States and in Ireland who literally need oxygen tanks to walk across the car park. Functionality and quality of life is so poor, You don't want to go down the road of all of these clinical conditions, so don't take your health for granted. See what it's like now and make sure it stays good. So try to keep your BMI, your waist-hip ratio and your circumferences in the normal range. If they are in the normal range, you will have a very low risk of developing any of these conditions that I've just spoken about. Get active and get fit. It is probably the most important thing that you could do in terms of your health, and it also obviously gives you all of the great benefits of more energy and all of the things that we've mentioned before. So you need to get active and you need to get fit. Nourish yourself with nutritious whole foods that we have included in our True Transformation Plan, not toxins that will drive your cholesterol and your blood sugar and everything else into unhealthy ranges and increase your risk of disease. And be smart, please do have your fasting blood sample taken. Every step you take literally has a massive impact on your health, so please have a look at your step count. And remember, it should be 10,000 per day. Our True Transformation Programme has incorporated everything that I have said to you today and all of the literature that's out there and all of our practical experience. And if you follow the True Transformation meal plans and if you follow the activity recommendations, you are on track for a much healthier life, far less risk of developing any of these conditions, and just most importantly, a happy, healthier and a great quality of life for yourself and your family. So please do consider the information that we've discussed. Take your measurements, get your blood sample taken, see what stage you're at, and if you need any help then of course please do contact us. And other than that then, thank you for listening and I hope your week goes well. Okay, thank you.